Greetings. A number of things have been said and spoken of over the last couple of days. A lot of it related to the Sargon video that I made, or comments he made. Now, I don't really want to turn this into a discussion about Sargon. However, some things that he talked about, and particularly some things that were said in the comment section, not by him, should be addressed. Now, the first thing I should address is the word problematic. I don't spend, as probably all of my subs know, most of my time or all my time watching feminist videos and SJW videos. I find them boorish, dull, and uninformative. So, if it is indeed the case that feminists and SJWs use the word problematic as such in the sense of transgressing an ideology, well, that's kind of their problematic problem. I use it, and I'll use the Merriam-Webster definition in the sense of, 1, posing a problem, 2, difficult to solve or decide, not definite or settled, open to question or debate, expressing or supporting a possibility. Look, so I don't know anything about SJWs using this term, whatever. The fact that the whole title was in there and it was a big stink was made of it is very telling. The assumption being that everyone watches SJWs and that we give full credence to SJW's control of the English language. It's a bit sad, but some other things were suggested by Sargon and other people, and those things were along the lines of dogmatism, MGTOW dogmatism. Now, this is a complex topic, and I'm going to be talking about a number of things here related to this. Most people in the MGTOW community, if we want to call it that, I don't like calling it a community, but whatever, know that there is a lot of disagreement. There's fracturing. There is factionalism, if you will. Most MGTOW don't agree on everything with each other, and that's just a fact. Now, it is true, there are some MGTOW-minded men, posters, commenters that are dogmatic and really fit that definition, or ideological. For example, there are a bunch of MGTOW subs or non-subs of mine who think it's heresy that I engage in talks with Girl Writes What because she's a female. Never mind the fact that she's well-informed and knowledgeable, is essentially pro-male, or at the very least pro-understanding human beings, and has been courteous, polite, and an ally. I consider her sort of a colleague in arms. But I shouldn't talk to her because she's a woman. That's dogmatic, just as an example. And I'm not going to stop talking to someone just because that person is a woman. I've never held that view. I think I've gone on record countless times as saying I engage people on the individual level. Of course, group aggregates, generalizations, they do apply, but ultimately it's going to come down to individual interaction, and that's what's going to determine how I assess a person, whether or not I'm going to engage with that person. So yeah, definitely, in this particular case, they're MGTOW dogmatic. Don't talk to Girl Writes What, because she's a woman, period. No, that's silly. That's dogmatic. So are there men like that in MGTOW? Sure. We have another contingent of men who quite literally hate women. They think women are evil, whatever. And I don't know how often I've spoken out against this, and other men have spoken out against it. This is beyond red pill rage, really. This is just, it's non-scientific. It's not based on data. It's just visceral emotion. And of course, I don't agree with that, and I don't support that. Now, in this particular instance, these kinds of men give cover to the intellectually lazy, and there are a lot of intellectually lazy people on Sargon's comment thread saying, oh, MGTOW is just about women hating. It's the same as feminism, blah, 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 blah. Now, what I've noticed is a tendency, a couple of things to be said about this. These critics, if you want to call them of MGTOW, whatever that even means, we can talk about the definition of MGTOW in a bit, is that they almost never cite specific information or data. It's just MGTOW hate women. MGTOW think women are evil. MGTOW is about completely avoiding women and condemning the entire other 50% of the human race. I mean, they don't actually engage the data we bring up, at least some of us bring up in reference. And people who openly say women are evil or hate women, they give cover to these people and allow them to continue in their intellectual laziness, frankly speaking. And there's another element to this. One of the reasons why I'm reluctant to actually have a conversation with Sargon, and I'm thinking about it quite a bit, is he and I think a lot of his other subs, they're not particularly interested in actually understanding what MGTOW is. And I made the analogy the other day in a private conversation with CS MGTOW and Colt, and I said, look, let's say you have an outside observer looking at the game of rugby, just as an example. The person isn't interested. He or she says, "Oh man, it's just a bunch of violent guys tackling each other, thugging it up, throwing each other to the ground." And they go, no. There's a lot of strategy involved. Let me explain it to you. And you say, I can take an hour and explain all of them. And they say, no, I'm not interested in understanding. I don't care. It's just violent. People are set in their mind. I doubt most people are honestly interested in understanding what MGTOW is. And it's a lot easier, just like to say rugby is just violence, to say MGTOW is just about hating women or excluding women or condemning half of the human race without taking a look at the evidence and without listening to what we have to say. Some of us, at least. But because of the fractiousness of MGTOW as a community, and I really dislike that word community, we're not really community, considering how much squabbling we have internally. The idea that we can just say MGTOW is one thing is difficult. I can't even say MGTOW is one thing. I tell you what it means to me. And beyond that, there's not much else I can contribute to defining what MGTOW as a concept is supposed to be. At the end of the day, at its core, MGTOW is about male autonomy, and I've made this reference before, and I'll make it again. All this quibbling and squabbling and disagreement on the internet is not going to have an effect on whether or not Vention can plant his tomatoes in the western mists of Washington State. It just doesn't matter. So, and likewise, once Fallout 4 comes out, all the quibbling, squabbling, and disagreement is not going to have an effect whether I can, when I have my free time, run a marathon 12-hour Fallout 4 session. Ultimately, that's what it's about, right? Autonomy, self-autonomy, and personal autonomy is a better way of putting it. That's what it comes down to. And everything else is just extras, whatever people think is appropriate. Now, to my brand, if you want to call it that, of MGTOW, yeah, of course, everyone who knows me, I'm interested primarily in understanding the human ape. I think there are many different angles you can take to understand the human ape, but some of the most important ones are things like evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, history, biochemistry, and I want to make videos in the future talking about things such as vasopressin, oxytocin, in greater depth, oxytocin, dopamine, so on and so forth, all these things. My interest is in understanding the human ape. Now, recently I put out a video on Neolithic hypergamy and how it correlated with the introduction of agriculture in the Neolithic. Now, I specifically pointed out and explained many times in the video that the occurrences we saw there, the 17-to-1 reproductive asymmetry, that was not evil. That's not condemning women as evil beings or whatever, but most people would just look at that and not listen to what I'm saying. And I'm specifically talking about the detractors in the Sargon of Akkad comment section of that video about being problematic, whatever that supposedly means. Say, oh, you're just pointing out how bad women are. Got lots of comments like that. No. Nature doesn't care. The universe doesn't care. Reproductive drives are on autopilot. They just are. Most people aren't consciously aware of these things. Do you think the man is consciously aware of him giving a woman more money when she's engaged in concealed ovulation? I think not. However, if we want to have an objective view of human beings, we can paint neither men nor women in a flattering light. It just so happens I do spend quite a lot of time talking about human female nature on this channel because it's not well understood. And specifically, and more importantly, the attempt to understand it isn't very well endorsed. When we try to understand female nature, yeah, some things are going to look unflattering, appear unflattering to come out to the fore. And when that happens, people have a hypersensitive reaction. We're not used to seeing women as anything but angelic and perfect. And this is particularly true of men, but also of women. And if we say something that doesn't make women seem to be perfectly virtuous, that just triggers an intense reaction. And particularly when you actually use data. Now, once again, none of these people are willing to, very few, I should argue, none, haven't talked to everyone. Very few people are willing to actually engage the data, talking about the genetic evidence, the economic evidence, the historical evidence, the biochemical evidence, and so on and so forth. So we're kind of in a quandary here. What do you do with people who call you dogmatic but aren't willing to look at the data and engage you in a civil conversation? I don't know. You just kind of ignore them, I guess, and keep on doing your own thing. Let people think what they're going to think. If people think that me talking about Neolithic hypergamy makes me a woman hater, and citing extreme reproductive asymmetry for extended period of time after the introduction of agriculture, for example, makes me painting too broad a brush of the other half of humanity, and blah, 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 and I'm saying women are evil because of that, of course, never using that word, and explicitly saying that that's not an evil, it's just neutral, it's just, that's what nature is. Yeah, I mean, how do you engage with people like that? You can't. And they claim that what I'm suggesting is dogmatic. We're talking about general human tendencies and patterns. Now, one thing I firmly believe, and you can call this dogmatic if you want, is that we're not going to get anywhere if we pretend that all human beings are the same. If we leave ourselves to political and philosophical idealism, which is, I suppose, laudable. It's born largely of Enlightenment values, the idea that everyone can more or less do the same thing without acknowledging profound sex differences. Then, yeah, I mean, we're not going to get very far. So what are the kinds of things that we talk about on my channel and related channels, like Barbarossa's channel and NCS MGTOW's channel and Coltane? We talk about things like what is the relationship, and this is one example of many, of women to the government and women in voting. Now I'll post a link to these two papers and you can look at it. One paper, CS had already brought this up, the questions, did women's suffrage change the size and scope of government? And published by R. Lott and W. Kennedy. And they start off accumulating data and speculate, and essentially come to the conclusion that yes, there was a relationship between them. Just read off some of it. You can read the entire publication. It's in the low bar if you want. We propose that giving women the right to vote change the size of government. We examined several indicators of the size and scope of government, state government, specifically the United States, mind you, state government expenditures and revenues, to voting index scores for federal House and Senate members from 1870 to 1940. 29 states gave women the right to vote before the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was approved in 1920, with 7 of the remaining 19 approving the amendment and 12 having women's suffrage imposed on them. Women obtained the right to vote in 4 states even prior to the turn of the century, in 8 states between 1911 and 1914, and in 17 states in 1917 to 19. By 1940, the end of our sample, women had been voting in 12 states for at least 26 years and in 4 states for at least 44 years. Although a number of women took advantage of the new right to vote immediately, it took several decades for turnout to fully adjust. We find that government continued to grow as female voter turnout increased over time. Since suffrage was granted to women in different states over a long period of time, extending from 1869 to 1920, it is unlikely that World War I is the key. That was a theory they referenced earlier. These data also show us to address causality questions in unusual ways. The central issue is whether giving women the right to vote caused government to grow, or there was something else that both contributed to women's getting the right to vote and increased government growth. We find very similar effects in women's suffrage in states that voted for suffrage and states that forced to give women the right to vote, which suggests the second effect is small, and so on. I mean, you can read the entire paper. And not everyone agrees with this. There's a paper that took by 2 women, whether that's relevant, who knows, on Switzerland. Now, Switzerland didn't grant the right to vote to women until 1971, and they find that a slightly different conclusion. So here's the abstract. You can read the whole thing if you want. Does the enfranchisement of women lead to increase in public support for government spending? By utilizing a natural experiment from Switzerland, I test this hypothesis empirically. I analyze the voting outcomes of 2 very different referendum ballots concerning the federal government competency to levy income, capital, and turnover taxes. The first ballot has taken place shortly before the extension of suffrage to women in February 1971, and the other thereafter. To shed light on the existence of gender gaps in approval for government spending, I first examine the additional turnout due to the introduction of female suffrage, and then estimate the additional turnout's impact on the percentage of yes votes. Surprisingly, I find that approval for government spending is higher among the male population. To overcome concerns that the results might only hold conditionally on voter participation decisions, I provide additional evidence from a probit analysis of post-ballot polls. These are conducted for voters and non-voters and confirm that the results extend to the non-voting population. My results complement the findings of previous literature which suggests that in the analysis of gender preference gaps for government expenditure spending, categories like welfare, etc., and non-welfare items should be distinguished. Well, she's essentially saying the same thing, more or less, that men and women vote on different issues. Now, even if the hypothesis of Lott and Kennedy is completely untrue or only held true in the United States, if you look at other studies on this, what does seem to universally hold true is that women tend to vote for greater public expenditures on welfare, on things like maternity leave. I mean, these are all important to women, and women are much more risk averse as well. This is well documented. Now, if I say that women are more risk averse and tend to vote for expansion of government programs and so on, does that make me hate women? Or is that just me objectively looking at and explaining what's happening in the world? No. It is what it is. It's neither good nor bad. Men want different things, and it's actually shown in the voting patterns of men and women. Now, some people would say just the mere mention of that makes you a misogynist or you hate women. And they say, I'm always saying unflattering things of women, but I think I had this idiot concern troll on a while back, he ultimately unsubbed, claiming that I glorify men. I don't know. I don't really think so. In fact, one of the worst things men ever, the reason why we're in the mess today, and you can actually listen to the talk with Aaron Pizzey and Sargon. He says it himself, albeit in flowery terms. He says, but Aaron, men love women. So what does that actually code for? Men love women. It just means men give women whatever they want, however they want it, and essentially on demand. The mess we're in today, the existence of the Sargon of Akkad channel, possibly my own channel, all of this stuff came to existence because men gave women everything they wanted. When women wanted the right to vote without responsibility, men gave it to them. When women wanted no-fault divorce, for example, Ronald Reagan in 1969 in the not-so-great state of California, they gave it to them. When they wanted unlimited abortion rights, men gave it to them. And so, and this is, this can go on and on. I'm just pointing out that men have systematically, over the last couple of decades, given women everything they wanted, maternity leave, so on and so forth. They've given women what they wanted, which ultimately, I think the key point here is the vote, suffrage, without responsibility, the attendant responsibilities, and you get lots of welfare growth in government. And frankly speaking, it's been pointed out many times, no single man can compete with the state. C.S. MGTOW recently put out a video where he pointed out and brought up data suggesting that a woman in the United States can receive welfare benefits amounting to something like $35,000 a year for doing nothing. That's significantly more than my annual income. I have a pittance as an annual income, $35,000. I would have immense amounts of disposable income with that salary, with that income. I'm not on welfare and hopefully will never be and have never been on. But just pointing out, you can't compete with that. So yeah, men are, I would argue, even more culpable for the existence of all the anti-male biases and things that are tacitly or explicitly written into law. Men gave women everything they wanted, and that's why we have this mess, because women wanted these things. They wanted no-fault divorce. They wanted the right to vote without having to actually do anything for it. That's why we're here. And Gurewitz-Watt has pointed this out. And once again, even when Gurewitz-Watt says this, it's viewed as, you're saying women are bad. No, she said, I said this a number of times, female nature isn't a pendulum. It's an engine. It keeps chugging and chugging and chugging. Right? And so we have to be honest about this and talk about the differences between men and women. None of this is good or bad. Hey, I can even accept the possibility that our feminist institutions and everything. This isn't really bad. It's good for the women. They get lots of welfare benefits. It's true. In the long run, they seem to be less happy about it. But it all depends on what your perspective is. So for most men, the system right now isn't particularly good. But lots of women benefit from it, so it's good for them. Good and bad are irrelevant. It's all about personal interest. None of this is good or evil, just is. Now, I try to be reasonably dispassionate in my observations of these things. And I can't say that that's true of all MGTOW-minded men. It doesn't need to be. I'm just me. I'm not a dictator. I don't tell people what to do. Now, moving on from that, the other notion is that MGTOW is about completely disassociating yourself from women and having no interaction with them. Well, poppycock, of course. Nobody I know, apart from myself, in MGTOW circles doesn't not interact with women. Now, why don't I interact with women? Well, for actually people actually care to listen. Now, why? I'm just not interested. I'm not obsessed with having sex, so, or intimate relations, so why would I waste time and energy and money? It costs money to do that. So, you're just suggesting women are only good for sex. Well, not necessarily. But let's be honest, most men engage with women because they want to have sex with them. This is the elephant in the room. Even men who, respect women as great intellectual contributors, and they still want to have sex with them because they quote unquote love them, as Sargon said. I don't hate women. I'm just indifferent to them. I don't care either way. So I'm not particularly vested in painting women in a negative light. But I'm also not vested in painting women in a particularly positive light. I just don't care. Women can do whatever they want. What they do largely has no effect on me or my life. So, now other men, most of the MGTOW-minded men I know, they engage a lot with women. Barbarossa's in a long-term relationship. Nico Chomsky, guy, he's a Mac Daddy. He has sex with lots of women. So the idea that MGTOW is about systematically separating yourself. The reason why I don't associate with women, by and large, I just don't care. It just doesn't interest me. The things that are usually associated with associating with women don't interest me. Sex and physical intimacy, they're just not worth the juice isn't worth the squeeze in that case. So I'd just rather do my own thing, save lots of money, so on and so forth. But I don't hate women. I just don't care about them. I'm indifferent. However, if I say I'm indifferent to women and don't care about women, to those people who are listening to these words, they say, that's hatred. That's misogyny. They're perfectly willing to gloss over tons of negative things that people say about men. We're not in tune to that. Societally speaking, culturally speaking, and biologically speaking, say shit about men, whatever. Say shit about women, their ears perk up like cat's ears, and they go on high alert and they're thinking, what is he saying? Indifference, and that's what I suggest. Indifference is not hatred. It's not active support, obviously. Like I said, I don't care. I don't care whether or not women get maternity leave. They can have maternity leave or not have maternity leave. I don't care. It doesn't affect me. So this is an example. And I want to point something out as well, that there's a kind of bittersweet irony to all of this. The people who label MGTOW dogmatic, who thinks it's about ideology rather than looking at sets of, I look at data. I'm interested in understanding the human ape. The irony here is that all the shit that people are trying to combat, with their anti-feminism and so on and so forth, most of these men they're obsessed with procreation. They want to have children, all this stuff. They ideally would like to get married. They're the ones more affected by this. Hey, things can get a lot worse, and I'm not saying they will, with divorce, with the stigmatization of being male in schools, with family life, with relationships. I won't be affected by that one iota. Why? Because I don't have relationships with women. I don't want children. I'm never getting married. So I'm actually pointing out information about the nature of human beings, both male and female, showing you that there are distinctions and that these need to be paid attention to, these distinctions. But ultimately for me, it doesn't matter. I'm not affected by any of this. The divorce situation, the family breakup situation, the dissolution of family could get 90% worse, and I would be largely unaffected. And I think a lot of MGTOW-minded men could say the same. And yet, I'm somehow I'm not I have no interest in this. Like I said, I'm simply indifferent on this. And the men who engage, in people in general, but men specifically, in a kind of philosophical, political, biological idealism without examining the differences between men and women are most often the men who want to procreate. They want to pass on copies of their genes. They want to interact with women. They need that. So that's kind of the irony. MGTOW are labeled as dogmatic, and they hate women and so on and so forth. I don't care either way. The entire family system could go to fucking shit. And it's true. It doesn't affect me, really. Marriage could become even worse. Doesn't affect me. Young boys could have it even worse in schools. Doesn't affect me. But what I do say is that we can spend the rest of our lives pointing out the stupidity of the Anita Sarkeesians and the feministines and all these idiots. We can engage in countless expenditure of anti-feminist energy while we're running in circles. It's like I pointed out in my Neolithic hypergamy video. If we do not examine the differences between men and women and what leads to these very divergent behaviors, the effects of these behaviors on government, the effects on these behaviors on social policy, the effects on these behaviors on interpersonal relationships, etc., so on and so forth, we're not going to get anywhere, ever. Now, if anti-feminism is just about entertainment, okay, whatever. I guess some people find it entertaining. I can't claim I do. But now that's the thing. The people who actually think that feminism is the sort of overwhelming evil and is responsible for everything, these are the people that tend to ignore the human differences between men and women, and are the first to respond by saying, "Oh, you're evil," or "You're saying that men and women are men are good and women are bad." No, 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 no. These are the ones most of the time. They wanna have children. They want to procreate. They want to have quote unquote fulfilling relationships with women. Most MGTOW, not all of them, most MGTOW don't care about that stuff. So I don't want a societal collapse or anything like this, but if the situation got worse for married men and in the university system and young men and large, I'm as an individual not affected by that. But I do think people need to start paying attention to these things. If you think it's dogmatic to use data and scientific research that you can find to the best ability to try to understand that and point that out and say, look, there's a connection between A and B. If that's dogmatic, I mean, you really need to look up the definition of dogmatism. I'm always willing to revise my views on things. If there were a massive data in the next 10 years that showed that women overwhelmingly were marrying men of significantly lower income bracket than they are, and who tended to be kind and loving, and men started marrying up and women of significantly greater income status and societal status. I mean, yeah, I would change my mind, or at least I would think, this is interesting. What's happening here? So dogmatic, I am not. I'm always willing to look at new evidence as it comes to me. And I work with the evidence that's available. I'm not perfect, and the evidence isn't perfect because we're limited in what's available. I do think we are at fault collectively for not allowing more evidence to be submitted to the public. I pointed it out many times. CS has tried to talk to neuroscientists, several, 40 I think. That's not several, many, about who specialize in sex differences in the brain. They can't get a word in edgewise. So the conclusion here is severalfold. One, most people who lambaste MGTOW and say it's this, X, Y, or Z, they're like the people lambasting rugby. They don't even care what it's really about. It's convenient, it's an easy way to dismiss it. They don't actually want to engage the data. Right? Another point is, yeah, there are different factions in MGTOW, and I don't agree with a lot of MGTOW-minded men on certain things, like women are evil or this or that, or you can't associate with women. That's ridiculous. You don't talk to women. That's ridiculous. I talk to individuals on an individual basis, If a woman's cool and she has something relevant to say that I can learn from, I'll talk to her. I'm not interested in having sex with her, which is why I don't pursue romantic relationships, but, if she has something interesting to say, I'll listen. And yeah, we just need to be aware that we will never find a fix to these problems, and they are pretty big problems, if we don't start looking at the underlying causes, which are divergent sexual behaviors between men and women. Men and women are not motivated by the same things beyond, eating, shitting, breathing, although allegedly women don't shit. There are huge differences. And if you don't want to talk about those differences and want to obfuscate, that's fine, but we do so at our own peril. Remember, I'm not going to be affected by all this shit, and most MGTOW-minded men aren't. It's the men who want to pass on copies of their genes. It's the men who want to engage in mating with women, and so on and so forth. Dogmatic is not the willingness to look at evidence and present data and draw conclusions, nor is it the willingness to review and revise your views on things. Dogmatic is to say, this is the way it is, it's never going to change. And finally, problematic is a real word. I'm going to keep on using it, regardless of what some idiotic SJWs say or feminists say. I don't even pay attention to those people. So that's all I have to say for now. Peace out.